There is a wall inside an ancient Egyptian tomb that shows a man doing something so small, so ordinary, that scholars ignored it for generations. He stands at the front of a massive wooden sled. On that sled sits a colossal stone statue, taller than a house, heavier than a loaded airliner. Behind him, long rows of workers strain against ropes. And this one man is leaning forward, calmly pouring water onto the sand. For generations, experts called it a ritual, a symbolic purification of the ground before the statue of a great man passed over it. A nice detail, nothing more. Most people walk right past it. Then a team of physicists decided to actually test it. They built a sled, loaded it with weight, and dragged it across dry desert sand. The sled plowed in, sand piled up in front of it. The force needed was enormous. Then they poured water onto the sand directly in front of the sled, exactly like the man in the painting. And the pulling force collapsed. It dropped by roughly half, not a little, half. The water forms microscopic bridges between the grains, binds the loose sand into a firm track, and turns shifting desert into a surface a heavy sled can glide across. The man in the painting is not performing a ceremony. He is executing a procedure. The painting is not art, it is documentation. They weren't praying, they were recording. And that changes everything. Because if that image is an engineering instruction, hiding in plain sight, mislabeled as religion for 200 years, then you have to ask what else we've been misreading. And in just the last 15 years, the answers have started arriving, and they are bigger than anyone expected. Scientists have recovered the actual written logbook of a man who helped build the Great Pyramid. In his own words, day by day. Satellites have found an entire lost river, a vanished arm of the Nile, buried under the desert, running directly past 31 pyramids. And beneath the oldest pyramid on Earth, a team of engineers has mapped what they argue is a machine. Not a metaphor, not a symbol. A machine that ran on water. This is the story of how the impossible got built. And by the end of it, the real question won't be how the Egyptians did it. It will be why we spent 2 centuries refusing to believe they could. Start with that painting, because it's the first clue, and it's the one you can see with your own eyes. It was carved into the tomb of a provincial governor named Jehuti-Hotep at a site called Deir el-Bersha, almost 4,000 years ago. The statue on the sled is estimated at 58 tons. The ropes are pulled by 172 men. Egyptologists had studied this scene since the 1800s. They counted the workers, they admired the composition, and they filed the water pourer under ceremony. Some early scholars even went further. When one 19th century Egyptologist suggested the water might be practical, meant to help the sled move, the idea was waved away in the literature. The consensus hardened. The water was ritual. Case closed for over a century. It took until 2014 for anyone to treat it as data. A physicist named Daniel Bohn at the University of Amsterdam ran the experiments and published the results in Physical Review Letters, one of the most rigorous physics journals in the world. His team found something remarkably precise. Dry sand is terrible to drag across. Soaked, muddy sand is also terrible. But sand wetted to just a few % water content, right at the leading edge of the sled, becomes stiff and smooth, and friction falls dramatically. The window is narrow. Too little water does nothing. Too much makes it worse. Now look at the painting again. The man isn't flooding the ground. He's not splashing water everywhere in some grand gesture. He is pouring a controlled stream at one exact point, the front edge of the sled, the only place where it matters. That is not the posture of a priest. That is the posture of a technician applying lubricant to a contact surface. Bond's team even calculated the consequence. On properly wetted sand, the same 58-ton statue could be moved by roughly half the workforce, or moved twice as far on the same effort. Across a state that hauled stone for 1,000 years, that single trick is the difference between a monument and an empire of monuments. The Egyptians had discovered a piece of granular physics that modern science didn't formally describe and measure until the 21st century. And they considered it so essential that they carved it into stone so it would never be forgotten. They weren't guessing, they were recording. Keep that pattern in your head as we go, because it is about to repeat at a scale that is hard to believe. A piece of evidence sits in plain sight. Experts label it symbolic. Then, an instrument, a satellite, or a physicist looks at it without the label, and the symbol turns out to be a system. It happened with the painting. It is about to happen with an entire river. But first, here's the thing. A clever trick for dragging statues does not build the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid is roughly 2.3 million blocks of stone, stacked 146 meters into the sky, finished in a casing of brilliant white limestone, and anchored around chambers of solid granite. The fine white casing stone didn't come from Giza. It came from quarries at Tura, on the far side of the Nile. The granite came from Aswan, more than 800 kilometers to the south. And this wasn't gravel. The ceiling of the king's chamber alone is roofed with granite beams weighing up to 70 tons each. Single stones heavier than a fully loaded battle tank, cut at Aswan, floated the length of Egypt, and then raised more than 60 meters into the body of the pyramid. Moving one statue is a project. Moving millions of tons of stone, on schedule, for roughly 2 decades, feeding and housing the thousands of workers who did it, is a supply chain. It is one of the largest logistics operations in human history. And for 2 centuries, everything we said about that supply chain was guesswork, estimates, models, arguments at conferences. Then, in 2013, the guesswork ended because archaeologists found the paperwork. Here's where it gets strange. The discovery didn't happen at Giza. It happened over 100 kilometers away, on the desolate coast of the Red Sea, at a place called Wadi al-Jarf. A French archaeologist named Pierre Tallet was excavating what turned out to be the oldest known harbor on Earth, a port built under the pharaoh Khufu himself, 4,500 years ago. The site had everything a working port needs: a long stone jetty reaching into the sea, dozens of massive stone anchors, and carved into the desert hills behind it, more than 30 storage galleries, long artificial caves, where the crews kept their equipment, including entire boats disassembled into numbered pieces like flat-pack furniture, waiting to be rebuilt for the next expedition across the Red Sea to the copper and turquoise mines of Sinai. Copper mattered, because copper made the chisels, and the chisels made the pyramid. Cut into the rock behind the harbor were storage galleries, and some of them had been deliberately sealed in antiquity, closed with heavy stone blocks, and left untouched for 4,500 years. Inside, among the anchors and the ropes, Tallet's team found hundreds of fragments of papyrus. When they were dated, the announcement stunned the field. These were the oldest inscribed papyri ever discovered, the oldest paper documents of the human race. And one set of them is a logbook, the private work journal of a mid-level official named Merer, the leader of a crew of about 40 men. For a stretch of months in the 27th year of Khufu's reign, Merer wrote down what his team did every day. And what they did was build the Great Pyramid. The entries read like a shipping manifest, because that's what they are. A typical stretch goes like this. One day, Merer and his crew are at the quarry, loading stone onto their boat. The next day, they cast off and sail downriver. The day after that, they arrive at the horizon of Khufu and unload. Then they turn around and do it again. Day after day, entry after entry, in neat administrative handwriting, with the 10th month of the year noted in the margin. Merer's crew loads fine limestone blocks at the Tura quarries. They sail them across the water. They deliver them to the construction site, which Merer calls by its real name, Akhet Khufu, the horizon of Khufu. 2 to 3 round trips in every 10-day Egyptian week, roughly 30 blocks per run. He records where his men slept, what they ate, when they were issued textiles and rations. He records his crew being redeployed between tasks: hauling stone, 1 month, working on water infrastructure, another. And he records reporting to his superior, a man he names directly, the noble Ankaif, Khufu's own half-brother, the overseer of all the king's works. A specific manager with a specific title signing off on specific deliveries. Historians already knew Ankaif existed. His portrait bust sits in a museum in Boston. The diary put him on the org chart. Stop and absorb what this is. This is not a legend written down centuries later. This is not a priest's boast on a temple wall. This is first-person testimony from inside the construction of the Great Pyramid, written by a man who was there, naming his boss, logging his cargo, counting his shifts. For 200 years, people claimed the pyramids were too big, too precise, too sudden to be human work. And the whole time, the receipts were sitting in a sealed cave by the Red Sea. If documents like this are the reason you're here, buried evidence that rewrites the story, hit subscribe, because this channel digs into exactly these discoveries every single week, and this investigation is only getting started. And there's a strange detail about how these papyri survived at all. When Khufu died, the port at Wadi al-Jarf wasn't abandoned gradually. It was shut down, and the galleries were deliberately sealed behind heavy blocks, with the paperwork still inside. Whether that was routine decommissioning or something more intentional, the effect was the same. The most important documents of the ancient world were locked in a stone vault and forgotten for 4.5 millennia, waiting for someone to notice the blocks didn't belong there. But Marer's diary has a problem, a big one. And the problem is geography. Marer describes sailing heavy stone barges essentially to the foot of the pyramid. He describes basins, docks, a pool of Khufu, water infrastructure, right at the site. But go to Giza today, and the pyramids stand on a dead desert plateau, kilometers from the Nile, surrounded by nothing but sand and city haze. For decades, skeptics pointed at that gap. You can't sail a barge across a desert. Scholars proposed canals, seasonal floods, hauling routes, but the hard evidence wasn't there. The most detailed construction document from the ancient world described a waterfront that did not exist until scientists found it, not with a shovel, from orbit. In 2024, a team led by geomorphologist Eman Gonem at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, published a study in the journal Communications, Earth and Environment. They used radar satellite imagery, the kind that penetrates dry sand and reads the ground beneath it, combined with geophysical surveys and deep sediment cores drilled into the desert floor. And under the sand, west of the modern Nile, the radar traced the unmistakable signature of a river, a lost branch of the Nile, roughly 64 kilometers long, in places over half a kilometer wide, flowing exactly along the desert edge where the pyramids stand. The team named it the Ahramat branch. Ahramat is Arabic for pyramids, because lined up along its buried banks, like ports along a coastline, sit 31 pyramids of the Old and Middle Kingdoms, including Giza. This wasn't a shape on a screen. The team drilled deep cores into the desert and pulled up the proof in physical layers, river sands and gravels sitting meters beneath the surface, exactly where the radar said the channel ran. A river you can hold in your hand, from a landscape that officially never existed. And then came the detail that turned a discovery into a confirmation. Many pyramids are connected to long stone causeways, raised ceremonial roads that march down from the plateau and simply stop in the desert. Egyptologists always suspected they led somewhere. The radar showed it. The causeways run perpendicular to the lost river and terminate precisely at its ancient bank. Several end in massive stone structures we call valley temples. Those temples were river harbors. The front doors of the pyramids opened onto water. It gets better. Excavations at Giza itself, led by archaeologist Mark Lehner, had already uncovered a huge basin and harbor works buried near the plateau, along with an entire lost city of the builders. Bakeries that produced bread on an industrial scale. Breweries, barracks that could sleep thousands. Enormous quantities of cattle bone, prime cuts, meat for a workforce that was fed like it mattered. Medical evidence from the workers' cemeteries shows healed fractures, set bones, treated injuries, not slaves. Rotating crews of paid, provisioned, even doctored labor organized into named teams with names like Friends of Khufu, exactly like the crews in Mare's logbook. The pyramid wasn't built by a mob under the whip. It was built by a workforce with an HR department, and independent evidence backs it up from a completely different direction. A separate team of scientists analyzed ancient pollen preserved in sediment cores from the Giza floodplain and reconstructed the water levels over thousands of years. Their finding, published in a major scientific journal, was that during Khufu's reign, the water stood high enough to reach the foot of the plateau. Two different methods, two different teams, same answer. When the Great Pyramid was rising, there was a working waterway at its feet. So now the picture snaps into focus, and it is nothing like the one in the textbooks. The pyramids were not built in a desert. They were built on a riverfront. 58-ton loads glided over wetted sand to the water, moved by barge along a branch of the Nile that has since vanished, and docked at harbors at the foot of the plateau. The desert we see today is a mirage. It arrived later. The Egyptians didn't conquer an impossible landscape. They chose a perfect one. And then the landscape died. That's the second clue. The river solved how the stone arrived, but it does not solve the hardest problem of all. How do you lift it? How do millions of blocks climb into the sky? Some of them heavier than anything a crane operator would casually touch today. For that, we have to leave Giza and go back in time to the place where the whole experiment started. Because at the oldest pyramid on Earth, hiding inside features that archaeologists have argued about for 100 years, water may have done something far stranger than deliver the stone. It may have raised it, and this is the clue no one could test. Until now. Decades before Giza, at Saqqara, the pharaoh Djoser built the Step Pyramid, the first monumental cut stone building in human history. Understand what that means. Before this structure, humanity built in mud brick, wood, and reeds. Then, in a single reign, under a legendary architect named Imhotep, 6 stone terraces rose 60 meters over the desert, and architecture as we know it began. There was no tradition to lean on, no older pyramid to copy. Whoever built this was solving every problem for the first time. And surrounding it are features that Egyptology has never fully explained. To the west sits a gigantic rectangular stone enclosure called Gizr el-Mudir, older than the pyramid itself, with massive walls and no clear purpose. No burials, no temple. For a century, its function has been an open question. Around the pyramid complex runs another mystery, an immense trench cut into the bedrock, known as the Dry Moat, containing deep rock-cut compartments arranged in sequence, one after another, like chambers in a system. And beneath the pyramid itself, shafts plunge down through the rock, including one vertical shaft descending 28 meters, with a huge granite box at the bottom, a box fitted with a removable plug. A tomb explains none of that geometry. But in 2024, a French research team of engineers and hydrologists, led by Xavier Landreau, published a peer-reviewed study in the journal PLOS One, proposing something that sounds impossible until you follow the plumbing. Their reconstruction of the ancient climate and terrain suggests that flash floods periodically poured down the desert wadis towards Saqqara. Gisr el-Mudir, they argue, sits exactly where you would build a check dam, a structure, to catch that water, calm it, and hold it. From there, the water could flow into the dry moat, where those sequential rock-cut compartments would function as a treatment line, settling basins where sediment drops out stage by stage, leaving cleaner water at the end. Water goes into the first compartment fast and dirty. It leaves the last compartment slow and clean. That is not a metaphorical reading of the trench. That is what the trench physically does if you put water in one end of it. And that cleaned water, they propose, was channeled through rock-cut galleries into the shafts beneath the pyramid itself. Which brings us to the granite box with the plug. In their model, the connected shafts form a hydraulic lift. Seal the system, let water rise in the shaft, and a wooden platform floats upward through the very core of the pyramid, carrying stone. Open the plug, the water drains, the platform descends for the next load. The pyramid, in this theory, wasn't only built from the outside with ramps. It was raised, from within, the team's own words, in volcano fashion, stone lifted through its center on a column of water. A dam, a water treatment plant, an elevator, at the dawn of architecture, almost 5,000 years ago. And notice what kind of claim this is. It is not a vague appeal to lost wisdom. It is a specific, testable engineering model. It predicts which structures should connect to which. It predicts flow directions, sediment layers in the moat compartments, wear patterns in the shafts, residues where water stood. Every one of those predictions can be checked with instruments that already exist. This is the rarest thing in the world of ancient mysteries, a theory that can actually be killed by a shovel. And here is where the pattern you've seen all video repeats. The deep structures under the step pyramid have never been fully cleared. The complex hides nearly 6 kilometers of tunnels, galleries, and shafts beneath it. One of the largest underground networks of any monument on Earth, and portions of it remain choked with debris and unexcavated since the early explorations, almost a century ago. The men who first descended into those passages in the early 20th century documented what they could reach, then stopped. Nobody has systematically gone deeper since. The team behind the hydraulic study openly called for new surveys and excavation to test their model directly. The site of the answer exists. It has coordinates, and it is still sitting there, unopened, while the paper that could be confirmed or destroyed by a single season of digging waits in review after review. The trench was cut, the dam was built, the shaft goes down, and nobody has been to the bottom of the question. Now, let's slow down and be honest with each other. Does all of this prove the most extreme version of the story? That every pyramid rose on hidden machinery and the ancient world ran on lost technology? Probably not, and you should be suspicious of anyone who tells you it's certain. The hydraulic lift is a hypothesis published by physicists and engineers, and many Egyptologists have pushed back hard. They argue the climate of Djoser's time may not have delivered enough rainfall to keep such a system charged. They point out that the dry moat may simply be a quarry, the source of the pyramid's own stone. They note that Djoser's blocks were small enough for men to carry, no elevator required, and that the study came from outside their field, engineers reading a monument the way engineers read everything. Every one of those objections is reasonable. Some of them may be right. But notice what the skeptics are no longer allowed to say. They can no longer say the Egyptians were mystics who stumbled upward by faith and muscle alone, because the proven record now includes controlled friction engineering carved as an instruction, an industrial logbook with quotas and personnel, a purpose-built harbor network on a river we only just rediscovered, and at minimum, even in the most conservative reading, dams and staged water basins at Saqqara that would rank among the oldest large-scale hydraulic works on the planet. And when it comes to the vertical climb, a real answer surfaced in 2018 at an ancient alabaster quarry called Hatnub, excavated by a joint British and French team, where archaeologists uncovered something no one had ever documented before. A steep ramp, far steeper than the gentle slopes engineers had always assumed, flanked by 2 staircases and lined with rows of carved post holes. Here's what that layout means. Ropes run around fixed wooden posts, change the direction, and multiply the leverage of a pull. Teams standing below the load could add their weight to teams pulling above it. Hauling sleds up gradients of 20% or more, slopes everyone had insisted were impossible. A force multiplier. A machine with no moving parts. And the inscriptions at the site date it to the reign of Khufu himself, the exact generation that raised the Great Pyramid. The blocks didn't need magic to climb. They needed geometry, rope, and a workforce that understood both. The grounded version of this story is not boring. The grounded version is a Bronze Age civilization doing applied physics without ever writing an equation. And that is what this discovery actually means. It means the Great Pyramid was not a miracle. It was a project. It had a budget, a workforce, a shipping schedule, a port authority, and a man named Mirror complaining his way through the 27th year of the reign. It means an ancient state mastered water, friction, leverage, and logistics at a scale we still find intimidating. And it means that knowledge could die. Around 4,200 years ago, a great drought gripped the region. The Aramat branch began to choke with sand. The harbors dried. The waterfront that made the pyramids possible retreated east, and the old kingdom that built them collapsed into famine and silence. The machine stopped because the water left. Within centuries, even the Egyptians themselves stood at Giza and wondered. By the time Greek travelers arrived 2,000 years later, the guides were already telling stories because the truth had been buried so completely that it took satellites and sealed caves to get it back. Which leaves one final question that nobody has answered. Merer's diary is one logbook from one crew in 1 year, and whole sections of the sealed galleries at Wadi al-Jarf and the papyri recovered there are still being studied, still unpublished, still coming. If the mid-level paperwork of the Great Pyramid survived in a cave for 4,500 years, then somewhere in a sealed gallery or under a collapsed shaft, the engineer's own plans may still exist. We found the delivery logs. We have not found the blueprint. Tonight, the plateau at Giza will go quiet. The tourists will leave, and the desert wind will move over sand that is not really desert at all. A few meters down, the bed of a dead river still runs past the pyramids, and the radar can see it. A dark ribbon under the dunes, still pointing at every harbor it once served. The causeways still march down from the tombs and stop at a bank waiting for water that is never coming back. At Saqqara, the shaft under the first pyramid still drops into the dark. The granite box still sits at the bottom, and its plug is still in place. The logbook of Merer breaks off mid-year, his crew mid-shipment, the stone mid-journey. The last pages were never found. They are still out there, sealed under the sand, still keeping the schedule of a machine the world forgot how to run. If you want to know what else the ancient world built that we were told to walk past, watch the next investigation on screen right now.